Welcome back. It may come as a surprise to you that several animals are mentioned in the Quran. A camel, several different kinds of birds, a dog, even an elephant. If the Quran is a work intended for human beings, why is there reference to animals? With me is Dr. Shabir Ali from the Islamic Information Center to discuss this topic. Now, Dr. Shabir, from the very beginning, in the story of Adam, we find the use of the crow. So maybe you could talk about that to begin.
Mm-hmm. It's mentioned that when there was a dispute between two sons of Adam, Cain killed Abel, and then he didn't know what to do with the body of his brother until he saw a raven scratching the earth, and then he said to himself, why don't I do what this raven is doing, and dig a hole and put my brother's body in it. So this was the first burial that is noted in the Quran. It was done in this way by a human copying a bird.
Mm-hmm. So what was the use of the bird then in that circumstance?
The bird obviously showed us how something can be done, and in our modern times we learn much from birds and from other animals. For example, if you want to design airplanes, we think about how to make them aerodynamic. We look at how birds fly, and we wonder about how they sustain themselves in the air like this. Well, we learn something from the animals.
Mm-hmm. I guess this kind of shows us that the laws and rules of this world don't just come from human beings, but God has given it to animals as well. They also
Yes.
follow the same rules.
Exactly. And one of the underlying principles that is enunciated in the Quran again and again is that everything serves God. We are told in the Quran, وَإِن مِّن شَيْءٍ إِلَّا يُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِهِ. Everything actually glorifies the praise of God, but we do not understand the manner of their praise. So animals in some way obey God. They follow God's natural order, His natural laws. And human beings have the choice to either obey or disobey. And when we disobey, we are actually making ourselves lower than the animals. Mm-hmm. But if we obey, we are better than the animals in that our obedience is a deliberate obedience as opposed to the natural or automatic obedience that the angels render to God.
Mm-hmm. What strikes me about the description of animals in the Quran is that they're seen in a very positive way, as doing good things or being associated with good things. I thought that was very interesting.
Yes, and the Quran says in the 6th chapter, the 38th verse, that all of the animals actually exist in communities similar to our communities. So we think of human communities, we think of father, mother, children, and we wouldn't separate a family. At the same time, we are being made to reflect on this when it comes to the animal world, and not to take one away from the family. Mm-hmm. Beyond necessity. And so it is mentioned in a hadith, a reported saying of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that somebody had taken away a chick from a nest, and the mother bird kept hovering over this area looking for her chick. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, asked, who has done this? And then he instructed, just return the chick to his mother. And we're not allowed to disturb a bird like this by taking away its chick. You see, so we are given a positive image of animals in the Quran, and we're told that they are worshippers of God in their own way, and that they exist in communities like us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's move on to another prophet with whom another animal was associated. So Prophet Saleh, the camel was associated with him. So maybe you can discuss that a little bit.
Yes, this camel was given as a sign, a test for the people. Prophet Saleh comes, and God's instruction to them is that they should allow this camel to drink freely from anywhere, but they do not allow this benefit to the camel, and this was the test which they failed. Mm-hmm. And they received retribution from God as a result.
Mm-hmm. I understood the camel, they asked for a camel as proof, or the camel came as proof of the prophethood of Saleh, and then they killed the camel?
They wanted a sign, and then this sign came, and then instead of giving the camel the drink, they hamstrung the camel. Mm-hmm. And so for their rejection of the camel, the rejection of the sign of God, they were punished.
Okay, so let's move on to Ibrahim or Abraham and the birds that were associated with him.
Yes, the Quran says that Abraham asked God, show me, how do you bring the dead back to life? And God said to him, take 4 birds, train them to come to you when you call them, and then put a part of them on each mountain. Some understand this to mean kill the birds and put parts of the birds on each mountain. And some others understand you just put like one each on the mountains, a part of this group of birds, and then you call out to them and they will come to you. And the lesson for Abraham is that if you can train these birds and they will come to you on your calling, then what about God, who creates human beings, and regardless of where the human beings are, when he calls them, they can come back to him. So even though our bodies have disintegrated and so on, we have become one with the earth, eventually when God calls us on the day of judgment, we will all come back out of the earth on God's call.
Mm-hmm. So this is another example where an animal is used as proof of God's existence or God's power then.
Exactly.
Are there any other circumstances like this, any other stories that show God's power, or that in which animals are used to show God's power?
Yes, there is the story of Uzair that is mentioned in the Quran. Who exactly is Uzair is not very clear. Some associated him with Ezra of the Bible. In any case, it is said that there was a man who went past a village and he saw the village in ruins. And he said to himself, well, who will bring this back to life after it has become such utter ruin? And then God caused him to sleep for 100 years, but preserved his donkey and preserved his food. So he and his donkey were there, and God brought him back to his senses, and he saw that his food was all just preserved as it was before, and he didn't realize that he slept for 100 years, but then the donkey had all now disintegrated by this time, and God resurrected the donkey back to life, and this was a proof to him that God's power at resurrection will never fail, and when God decides he can resurrect the whole village, he can resurrect the entire world.
Mm-hmm. One famous story that is described in detail in the Quran are the cows that are associated with the children of Israel. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, it is mentioned that, well, as a background first, we should recognize that the worship of the cow was popular in ancient times. So the Israelite people were being tested in this way. Can they maintain their monotheism, their belief in the one God, or might they turn towards the worship of the cow as people were doing it around them? When Moses went up to speak with God and he came back, he found that they were worshiping the calf. And so the instruction that came to him from God was that the people should slaughter the calf as a way of doing away with this entirely. And then they raised questions as to what kind of cow, what color of cow, and so on, so that eventually they did the slaughter. But the Quran says that they almost didn't do it. It may mean that the heart and soul was not into it.
We'll have to leave it at that, Brother Shabir. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
There's lots more that we could say about animals in the Quran, so we'll be continuing our discussion next week. In the meantime, we'll take a break, so stay with us for our next segment.